What if being absolutely sure you're right is actually the most dangerous thing you can do?
What if the most dangerous thing in the world isn't ignorance, but certainty? Think about it. Wars have been fought, civilizations destroyed, and countless lives lost, not because people didn't know enough, but because they were absolutely convinced they already knew the truth. Certainty feels safe. It feels strong, but behind that confidence often lurks a hidden weakness. The death of curiosity, the surrender of questioning, the end of growth. Imagine a doctor who refuses to reconsider a diagnosis, a judge who's unwilling to doubt their verdict, or a leader so sure of their beliefs that no evidence can penetrate. History shows us again and again that it's not uncertainty that destroys societies, it's blind conviction. And today, in an age of polarization and algorithm-driven echo chambers, the danger has never been greater. If you value deep thinking, subscribe now. This channel is for you. What if I told you that certainty is the greatest illusion of all? That moment when you feel absolutely sure about a belief, a decision, or even your worldview, it feels like standing on solid ground. No cracks, no wobbling, no risk of falling. Certainty is seductive because it offers what every human craves: safety. The brain whispers, "You know this. You don't have to question it anymore." And in that moment, doubt, the uncomfortable companion of real learning, quietly slips out the back door. Think about the last time you were sure of something, only to discover later you were wrong. Maybe it was a belief about a person you trusted, an opinion about politics, or even a memory you swore was accurate. When the truth surfaced, you felt that jolt of surprise, maybe even embarrassment. That shock isn't just emotional, it's neurological. Your brain builds shortcuts to conserve energy, and certainty feels like the ultimate shortcut. It says, stop searching, stop asking, stop thinking. The illusion of knowing works like a drug. It numbs uncertainty and silences curiosity. And like a drug, it feels good, so good that we don't notice the cost. Entire societies fall into this trap. During the Middle Ages, people were certain that the Earth was the center of the universe. Questioning that belief wasn't just discouraged, it was punished. Certainty created stability, but it also created blindness. It took people like Copernicus and Galileo willing to endure ridicule, prison, even exile to break that illusion. Now, you might think we've outgrown that kind of collective blindness. But look around. Our world today runs on the same fuel. Certainty, packaged in slogans, sound bites, and social media posts. People no longer argue ideas, they cling to identities. "I'm right, you're wrong" has replaced. Let's explore this together. The illusion of knowing turns dialogue into combat, neighbors into enemies, and information into ammunition. And the scariest part? It always feels justified. When you're certain, it doesn't feel like arrogance. It feels like truth. But here's the paradox. True wisdom doesn't come from absolute conviction. It comes from recognizing how little we actually know. Socrates, often called the wisest man in Athens, didn't claim knowledge as his strength. His strength was admitting ignorance. He said, "I know that I know nothing." That humility wasn't weakness, it was power. Because the moment you admit you might be wrong, you open the door to learning, to growth, to transformation. So ask yourself this: where in your life are you clinging to the illusion of knowing? What truths have you locked away in a safe, refusing to examine them? The moment you believe you've arrived, you've stopped traveling. The moment you're sure you're right, you've stopped growing. Certainty feels safe, but it's a prison disguised as freedom. The first step to breaking out is daring to question the very beliefs that feel most unshakable. Why does conviction feel so intoxicating? Why do we cling to absolute certainty even when reality whispers otherwise? The answer lies not in philosophy alone, but in the wiring of your brain. You see, conviction isn't just a belief, it's a chemical experience. When you're certain about something, your brain rewards you. It releases dopamine, the same neurotransmitter that fires when you eat your favorite food, win a game, or fall in love. Certainty feels good because your brain treats it as a victory. Uncertainty, on the other hand, activates discomfort. Studies in neuroscience show that ambiguity lights up the amygdala, the brain's fear center. To your mind, not knowing feels like danger. That's why doubt can feel like standing on shaky ground, while conviction feels like building a fortress. Your brain doesn't care if the belief is right or wrong, it only cares if it calms the chaos. Certainty silences the alarms. But here's the hidden danger. When the brain learns that conviction feels rewarding, it starts craving it. Like an addict chasing the next hit, we look for beliefs that make us feel safe, stable, and right. This is why conspiracy theories thrive. They provide simple, absolute answers in a world of complexity. Even if the theory is absurd, the psychological payoff is real, a sense of clarity, belonging, and control. Think about it. When you scroll through social media and see a headline that perfectly matches what you already believe, what happens? You feel a little spark of satisfaction. That's your brain rewarding you for confirmation. Psychologists call this confirmation bias, the tendency to seek, interpret, and remember information that supports our existing beliefs. It's not stupidity. It's biology, and it means conviction can become addictive. Now, imagine what happens when entire groups get hooked on this psychological high. Political tribes, religious movements, even fan cultures all become echo chambers where conviction is reinforced and doubt is punished. The more people agree with you, the more your brain lights up with reward. The cycle deepens, and before long, certainty becomes not just a belief, but part of your identity. To question it feels like questioning who you are. Here's the problem. Once conviction fuses with identity, critical thinking shuts down. You stop asking, "Is this true?" and start asking, "Does this support my side?" The brain, addicted to the dopamine of certainty, pushes away anything that threatens the narrative. Truth becomes secondary to psychological comfort. But here's the paradox. The very discomfort of uncertainty is where real growth lives. Doubt is the mind's way of signaling, pay attention, learn more, go deeper. Conviction feels rewarding in the moment, but it can blind you in the long run. Just as sugar gives a quick rush but damages the body if consumed endlessly, conviction without questioning gives a fleeting sense of safety but starves the intellect. So the next time you feel absolutely certain, pause. Ask yourself, am I chasing truth or am I chasing the dopamine hit of conviction? That question alone could be the key to breaking the cycle. Belief is powerful. It can inspire revolutions, fuel resilience, and give meaning to lives. But when belief hardens into certainty, it becomes something far more dangerous: blindness. History is filled with moments when absolute conviction led humanity into catastrophe. And the irony is, those who marched forward with unshakable confidence often believed they were serving truth, justice, or even God. Consider the philosophers who warned us of this trap. Friedrich Nietzsche cautioned that convictions can be prisons, locking us into rigid structures that suffocate exploration. He wrote, "Convictions are more dangerous enemies of truth than lies." Why? Because lies can be exposed, but conviction disguises itself as virtue. To hold an unquestioned belief feels noble, even righteous, but in reality, it may be nothing more than a chain wrapped in gold. Think about the Salem witch trials. These were not carried out by villains reveling in cruelty, but by neighbors, parents, and leaders utterly convinced they were protecting their community. Their belief was absolute. Their certainty blinded them to reason, evidence, and compassion. And in that blindness, innocent people were condemned. This is the philosophical pitfall of certainty. It transforms morality into dogma and justice into persecution. But this isn't just history. Look at our modern world. Political ideologies often promise clarity. One side declares themselves defenders of freedom, while the other insists they alone fight for equality. Each camp clings to its narrative with religious zeal. The result? Dialogue collapses, nuance disappears, and society fractures. The philosophical blindness of conviction turns us into warriors of identity rather than seekers of truth. Here's the problem. Belief, when unexamined, becomes self-sustaining. It filters what you see, what you hear, even what you think. You stop evaluating new information on its merit and instead measure it against your sacred conviction. If it fits, you accept it without question. If it challenges you, you dismiss it or attack it. This isn't wisdom. It's blindness masquerading as clarity. Philosophers from Socrates to Kierkegaard understood that doubt is essential to truth. Socrates became famous not for answers, but for questions. He recognized that the moment belief becomes absolute, it ceases to be philosophy and becomes dogma. Kierkegaard, wrestling with faith, argued that the leap into belief must always carry uncertainty. Without doubt, belief isn't authentic, it's indoctrination. So, ask yourself, which of your beliefs have become unquestionable? Which convictions feel so central to your identity that you defend them at all costs? That's where blindness begins. The true philosopher, the true seeker, doesn't cling to conviction, but learns to dance with uncertainty. Because only in doubt can wisdom grow. Belief should be a lantern, lighting the way forward, not a wall that blocks the horizon. When conviction becomes blindness, we mistake shadows for truth and certainty for wisdom. The challenge is not to abandon belief altogether, but to hold it lightly, always willing to ask, what if I'm wrong? Dialogue is the lifeblood of human progress. It's how ideas are tested, how knowledge expands, and how societies evolve. But when certainty enters the room, dialogue begins to die. Why? Because real conversation requires openness, curiosity, and the willingness to be changed. Certainty, by its very nature, resists all three. Think about the last time you spoke with someone who was absolutely convinced they were right. Did it feel like a conversation or a battle? Instead of listening, they were waiting to respond. Instead of seeking understanding, they were seeking victory. Certainty turns dialogue into debate, and debate into war. In that environment, critical thinking doesn't stand a chance, because the goal is no longer truth, it's dominance. History gives us chilling examples. In the years leading up to World War II, dialogue in Germany was systematically replaced with propaganda. Citizens no longer debated policy. They repeated slogans. Intellectuals no longer questioned authority. They aligned with it. When conviction silences dialogue, the result isn't just ignorance, it's catastrophe. The collapse of critical thinking allows destructive ideas to spread unchecked, shielded by the armor of certainty. But this doesn't just happen in extreme moments of history. Look at today's digital world. Social media algorithms thrive on certainty. They reward outrage, amplify extreme opinions, and punish nuance. Try posting a thoughtful, balanced perspective and see how little attention it gets compared to a polarizing rant. Dialogue requires patience and reflection, but platforms built for speed and emotion turn conversation into echo chambers. The louder and more certain you are, the more visible you become. The tragedy is that when dialogue collapses, so does empathy. Certainty doesn't just block ideas, it blocks people. If I'm absolutely certain that I'm right, then anyone who disagrees must be ignorant, evil, or dangerous. Once you've dehumanized the other side, you no longer need dialogue at all. Critical thinking is replaced with tribal thinking, and human connection with hostility. But here's the deeper danger. When you shut out opposing views, you shut down your own growth. Without dialogue, your mind becomes stagnant, recycling the same beliefs without ever testing them. True critical thinking is like a muscle. It grows only when stretched, challenged, and pushed beyond comfort. Certainty denies you that growth. It feels like strength, but in reality, it's weakness. So how do we revive dialogue in a world addicted to conviction? It begins with humility. It means entering conversations not to win, but to understand. It means listening not for flaws in the other person's argument, but for truth you might have missed. It means asking, "What can I learn here?" instead of, "How can I prove them wrong?" When certainty dies, dialogue is born again. And when dialogue thrives, critical thinking flourishes. If we want to protect wisdom in an age of noise, we must dare to trade the comfort of conviction for the challenge of conversation. Have you ever wondered why those in power love certainty? It's because certainty is one of the easiest tools to control. A questioning mind is unpredictable, but a convinced mind is obedient. Throughout history, leaders have understood this truth. If you can turn conviction into dogma, you can rule not just bodies, but souls. Look at the Roman Empire. Emperors demanded not just loyalty, but worship. Citizens weren't asked to think, they were told to believe. The power of Rome wasn't only in its armies, but in its ability to convince people that obedience was sacred. Fast forward centuries, and you'll find the same pattern. Totalitarian regimes thrive on absolute conviction. The Nazi salute wasn't just a gesture, it was a ritual of certainty, a daily reinforcement that questioning authority was unthinkable. Why does this work so well? Because conviction offers people a shortcut through fear. In times of chaos, uncertainty feels unbearable. Leaders step in and offer absolute answers. Trust me, follow this, believe in that. And because certainty feels safer than doubt, people surrender their independence in exchange for stability. What begins as comfort quickly becomes control. Religion, too, has been used in this way, not faith itself, but dogma. Spiritual conviction, when weaponized, gives leaders extraordinary power. When people believe that obedience to authority is obedience to God, dissent becomes not just rebellion, but sin. History is littered with wars, persecutions, and inquisitions born from leaders exploiting the human hunger for certainty. But before you think this only belongs to the past, look at today's world. Politicians on every side exploit conviction to build loyalty. They use slogans instead of policies, emotions instead of evidence. Why? Because certainty mobilizes. People don't march in the streets for nuance. They march for absolute conviction. Leaders know this. They exploit it. And once a group is united by certainty, it becomes nearly immune to reason. This is why propaganda works so well. It doesn't aim to persuade through evidence. It aims to bypass critical thinking entirely and offer people a ready-made conviction. Repeat it enough times, tie it to identity, and soon it becomes unshakable. Leaders don't need to suppress every opposing voice, only to convince their followers that listening to other voices is betrayal. The danger isn't just obedience, it's dependency. When people become addicted to absolute conviction, they stop thinking for themselves. They outsource judgment to authority figures. Leaders thrive on this because it makes their power almost unbreakable. A population willing to question is a threat. A population that believes without doubt is a dream. But here's the truth. Every time you surrender to dogma, you give away your freedom. Real power comes from uncertainty, from the courage to think even when it's hard. Leaders may exploit conviction, but they cannot control a mind that dares to question. And that, perhaps, is the most revolutionary act of all. We've been taught to see doubt as weakness, as hesitation, as failure of confidence. But what if uncertainty is not a flaw, but a hidden strength? What if the wisest people are not those who cling to conviction, but those who hold space for doubt, for complexity, for the unknown? The paradox is this: uncertainty feels fragile, but it is the very foundation of resilience. Think of the scientist. Every breakthrough in history began not with certainty, but with a question. Newton asked why the apple fell. Einstein asked whether time itself could bend. They didn't start with conviction. They started with doubt. Uncertainty is not the enemy of progress. It is the engine of discovery. Without it, the human story would have remained frozen in place, trapped by the illusion that what we already knew was enough. But this isn't just about science. It's about daily life. When you allow yourself to live with uncertainty, you remain open to new perspectives, new people, new possibilities. The rigid mind, obsessed with certainty, becomes brittle and defensive. The open mind, willing to admit, "I don't know," becomes flexible and adaptable. And in a world that changes faster than ever, adaptability isn't just a virtue, it's survival. Psychologists call this intellectual humility, the ability to recognize the limits of your knowledge and to stay curious in the face of complexity. Studies show that people who embrace uncertainty are better problem solvers, more empathetic, and less prone to extremist thinking. Why? Because they are not enslaved by the dopamine rush of conviction. They are free to explore, to adjust, to learn. History honors those who stood fast in truth, but truth itself is rarely simple. Socrates, condemned for corrupting the youth of Athens, was guilty of one crime: teaching people to question. His wisdom was not in having answers, but in showing that admitting ignorance is the first step toward wisdom. That lesson is just as urgent today, in a world where algorithms feed us certainty until we choke on it. Here's the uncomfortable truth: uncertainty requires courage. It's easier to pick a side, cling to a belief, and silence the discomfort of doubt. But easy paths rarely lead to strength. When you choose to sit with uncertainty, you're building the mental muscle of resilience. You're training yourself to withstand complexity instead of fleeing from it. And in that practice lies freedom. So ask yourself, what belief are you willing to question this week? What truth do you hold so tightly that it scares you to loosen your grip? Lean into that discomfort. Because in that space, in the trembling ground between knowing and not knowing, you will find the wisdom that conviction can never offer. Uncertainty isn't weakness. It's the courage to keep thinking, keep learning, and keep growing, even when the answers aren't clear. And in a world addicted to certainty, that courage might just be the rarest form of strength.